Good evening. Welcome to the Buck Stops here. I'm Vishnu Shom. On the program this evening, a fresh controversy involving the Health Minister Harshad, who wrote on his website that so-called sex education should be banned. Well, these are new comments, but come days after a controversy broke out with the minister saying the focus of AIDS control effort should lay less stress on condom use. Tonight on the Buck Stops here, education without sex taboos. Is 21st century India still not ready? Also coming up, we continue our focus on Iraq as NDTV's Amitabh Revi brings us exclusive ground reports from Erbil, just 100 kilometers from Mosul, where several Indians continue to remain hostage. NDTV is the only Indian television news channel to be in Iraq at the moment. But first, here's our top story. Another controversial statement by the Health Minister, Dr. Harshad, has come to light. Ahead of the Assembly elections in Delhi, Dr. Harshad, who was in the running to become Delhi Chief Minister, wrote on his website, so-called sex education should be banned. Are these the views that we can expect of a modern, progressive Health Minister of India?
India's Health Minister under fire for this controversial statement on sex education in schools. In a vision document on education put up on his website in the run-up to the Delhi Assembly elections last year, Dr. Harshad, as the BJP's then chief ministerial candidate, says, so-called sex education to be banned, yoga to be made compulsory. Picked up now by the media, the statement has provoked angry reactions.
Old-fashioned attitudes are simply not going to work. Your standards of morality may not be what is being practiced by the young today.
बिल्कुल उम्मीद नहीं कर रही थी कि भारत देश का एक स्वास्थ्य मंत्री जो खुद डॉक्टर भी हैं इस तरीके का बयान दे सकते हैं।
उनके अपने विचार हैं या जो वो खुद सोचते हैं कि ये बहुत अच्छी चीज है, ये बहुत नैतिक है, वो उसको एक पूरे मतलब करोड़ों लोगों के देश के ऊपर थोपने की कोशिश करते हैं।
ये ऐसा बयान ये न सिर्फ आपत्तिजनक है, ये बेहद खतरनाक है क्योंकि ये हमारे बच्चों को दरअसल खतरे में डाल रहा है, खतरे में छोड़ रहा है।
To add, author Chetan Bhagat tweeted, highly disturbed and disappointed by statements of a Dr. Health Minister, BJP at its regressive worst. The BJP, however, distanced itself from the controversy, with Sanjay Kaul saying, quote, the issue of banning sex education in schools has not been discussed on the party forum, unquote. Though a party MP did openly back Dr. Harshvardhan's view.
डॉक्टर हर्षवर्धन जी की बात से मैं 100% सहमत हूं कि एजुकेशन में सेक्स के बारे में पाठ्यक्रम में जोड़ना, पढ़ाना ये उचित नहीं माना जाएगा।
Stung by the criticism and media glare, Dr. Harshvardhan, who is away in the United States of America, issued a statement saying, sex education necessary but without vulgarization. Crudity and graphic representation of culturally objectionable symbols cannot be called sex education. The view is entirely my own and made in the context of the UPA's 2007 decision to introduce the Adolescence Education Program. The UPA's Adolescence Education Program, or AEP, which was launched in 2005, had sparked off a major row in 2007 over a manual for teachers allegedly featuring offensive illustrations. Several states, including Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Rajasthan, Kerala, Chhattisgarh and Goa, declared the program unacceptable and suspended it. While his statement may have sparked off a controversy, what Dr. Harshvardhan's statement has also done is to bring the focus back on an issue that many would argue needs urgent attention. An NDTV Bureau report.
Well, the big question this evening, in this century, is India still not prepared to deal with something as fundamental as sex education for adolescents? That's the question we are asking this evening. Education without sex taboos, is 21st century India still not ready? Joining us, Lalita Kumaramangalam, spokesperson of the BJP, Dr. Kiran Walia, senior leader of the Congress, Dr. K. Sujata Rao, former head of the National AIDS Control Organization, Tehseen Poonawala, the social activist, Lata Vaidyanathan, principal of Modern School, Barakhamba Road in Delhi, and from Thiruvananthapuram, Praveen Parmeshwar, a social activist. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. Lalita Kumaramangalam, as you know, ma'am, Dr. Harshvardhan has issued a clarification. He writes, sex education is necessary but without vulgarization. I'm curious to know what is vulgar about sex education.
Vishnu, there's one thing that we all have to keep in mind here. Now, I have worked in the field of HIV/AIDS for at least 10 to 12 years. And whatever may be my views personally on this topic, the fact does remain that in India, the word sex, even today, whether you call it orthodox, regressive, etc., is considered taboo. People don't want to talk about sex. Now, whether it's right, wrong, that's a different issue altogether, and I think it's a never-ending topic. But the fact is that most people don't want to hear about it as sex education. When this move was brought in to bring what we used to call lifestyle education in those days, it was a huge struggle. And I'm sure Sujata Rao, who's on this panel also, will accede to this, because it was when she was head of NACO, I think finally we managed to bring it into the syllabus. But there was a problem with that. The fact was that after it was brought into the syllabus, neither were teachers trained to actually explain the nuances of this, nor were actual classes held. There have been several occasions when I was still active in the field of HIV/AIDS prevention, where students have told us that we don't know what it means. And what do you mean by sex education? Basically, we are trying to teach youngsters to live more responsibly, which also includes it if they are sexually active. But this is not how
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you said something when you began your answer.
Sex education, everybody's walls go up and you sort of hit a concrete wall, and it's really more counterproductive than anything. To just condemn what Dr. Harshad said without understanding why he said it, I think is a little premature.
Ma'am, is sex a bad word?
I'm not saying sex is a bad word, Vishnu, but you need to ask the millions of middle class Indians who seem to think that using this word sex itself is not really part of our culture.
Okay.
Now, like I said, one can argue the rights and the wrongs of that, but that is a different issue.
No, ma'am, we'll argue everything. You're talking about the AEP. You've spoken about the AEP.
Okay.
I'll talk about the AEP. We've got plenty of time to talk about the AEP. It's a fundamental, the adolescent education program is a fundamental part of this discussion. But I just want to get, the notions, because...
Yes.
Right. Tehseen had a point. Go ahead. Yes.
With respect, I would like to tell the statement made by the BJP spokesperson, who herself is a doctor, seems very elitist. When you turn around and say nobody wants to talk about sex, it ends up saying, but we will talk about sex. The whole day, every news channel has been carrying this story. Social media has been carrying this story and panning Dr. Harshad, who himself has clarified. The fact of the matter is, whether ma'am agrees with me or disagrees with me, the nation is talking about sex. The fact of the matter is, whether you like sex or you dislike sex, you are the second most populous country in the world, going on to become the most populous country in the world. Two issues out here, let's keep both of them a little separate. First is, she hasn't answered your question, what is vulgar in sex education? Surely Dr. Ma'am herself, who's a doctor, or Dr. Harshad, who's gone to school, do not believe that the program taught sex education practically. Number two, the issue of condom use, which Dr. Harshad also criticized, and that's the other issue we talk about. Even being in a monogamous relationship, surely you should be encouraging using of condoms if you want to keep your population.
No, one sec.
I don't want to divert from the topic.
Again, this is another part of the discussion.
But so on both of these,
I want to understand the taboo.
Can I come in here, please?
But let's go to the first part of it. What is the taboo about teaching about vulgar, about sex education? What is vulgar? And I'll just make a quick point, since they did make it political, the UPA 2007. What is vulgar is a rapist and rape accused in the cabinet. What is vulgar is MLAs watching porn in the cabinet and not being suspended from the BJP in Karnataka. That is vulgar. Vulgar is not teaching your youngsters about sex. That is not vulgar. What part about it is vulgar? Can they define vulgarity to us?
Lalita Kumara Mangalam, ma'am, why don't you reply to that before I go across to my other panelists?
It's ironic. It's ironic that, I never said that you need to teach our youngsters, and considering that the Congress spokesperson just more or less admitted that we are the largest growing and the quickest growing population in the world, it's not a question of teaching sex education. Sex education is supposed to be about teaching youngsters to behave responsibly. This is what most people don't seem to understand. And with regard to what is called vulgar, anything that the general public does not want to hear about and considers vulgar is vulgar. It doesn't matter what we political leaders and
the general public
offices and
doesn't want to hear about sex education.
That we have to be able to sell it to the general public in a way which they are willing to hear.
Let me give you a statistic. Ira Trivedi writes in the Outlook, my findings included reports that premarital sex in urban areas is on the rise and is currently at an estimated 75% in the 18 to 24 age bracket.
It is.
So when you say that people don't want to talk about sex, How are
and
you
this
saying
is why
this?
we need to teach youngsters to behave more responsibly. If you're going to call it sex education, if the teachers don't want to explain it to the children, I can challenge you today, go to the biggest schools in Delhi, Chennai, Calcutta, Mumbai and find out how many teachers actually sit down and teach that particular section in the biology, or I think it comes in the biology textbooks.
It's not just about biology. It's not just about biology.
Okay, one moment.
Just a second. It's not just about biology. It's about psychology. It's about what is a good touch, what's a bad touch, what is respecting the no.
I'll come to you.
Yes.
Lata Vaidyanathan, as principal of Modern School Barakhamba Road, how do you deal with this issue? Is there an effort to educate children in sex education and all that it entails? Or is sex a bad word as far as your teachers are concerned?
Vishnu, it's very interesting to have to listen to all these arguments that were raised earlier. I want to mention here that I'm not going to be talking about any political decisions or policies. I'm going to be talking about the adolescent education program, and I want to tell you that a lot of teachers were involved in dealing with the entire curriculum that was drafted, and I don't think there's anything really wrong with it. I also want to add that, you know, basically the word sex or sex education is a taboo even today in many homes. Nobody talks about it. Look at the kind of exposure children have of all age groups. Early puberty, the technology, the digital kids. There's so much of exposure and they don't know what to do with this information overload.
Right.
I would think that it is the responsibility of the schools, considering that it is a heterogeneous system. It has got children of all gender, both the genders. We have children of all classes, all communities, all kinds of social and religious beliefs, all kinds of economic backgrounds, and the schools are best equipped to handle this actually. And I think it's not about every teacher going into a classroom and talking about sex education and sex as in the act of sexual participation. It is about the entire process of growing up. It's both physical, emotional, psychological, and I think it is done through various mediums such that the child can understand. This can begin right from the preschool education in so many different ways. And I think children are allowed to grow in a very healthy manner with responsible behaviors.
Okay.
I don't think we need to be so scared of the whole issue. And I think teachers are trained and they do a good job. More of this should happen in a very systematic, organized way with the content which should be age appropriate. I'm just focusing that it should be age appropriate because they then begin to understand things. This has to be seen in, not in isolation, not seen as rape stories, not seen as child abuse. It may even be seen as child abuse actually. So when I look at this situation, I feel that we are dealing with difficult situations.
It needs to be seen, ma'am, as I understand what you're saying, as a fundamental part of the education of children as they grow up, and the education imparted has to be specific given the age of the child. Praveen Parmeshwar, why don't you come in over here? Is there anything that you disagree with what Lata Vaidyanathan says? Isn't sex, I mean, and I sense that you're going to talk about how our culture and how our past sort of holds certain issues to be taboo. The equal can be said about how it doesn't hold things taboo, and how sex education is an important part of our past, and it needs to be discussed with the forthright attitude.
Correct. Let me mention you one thing. I don't think that Dr. Harshad Mehta is against sex education. But what he's talking is about the current content, mode and structure of sex education, which was initially rejected by 30% of states in India. Being a doctor, being himself a doctor with practice of more than 3 decades, and also the health minister in India, if Dr. Harshad Mehta is having an apprehension about the current system structure and content of the sex education, why can't we go for a review? Because he's not about talking against sex education, he's talking about the current sex education. Because I want to mention, let me mention one point also. In the website of Harshad Mehta, in his health policy, you can read like this: educate people. In the health vision policy in Harshad Mehta's website, he says that educate people about alcohol, drug, tobacco, as well as unsafe sexual behavior. that itself says that Dr. Harshad Mehta is not against sexual education, but he's against the current mode. That's one thing I wish to say. The second point I want to say is,
I'm sorry, actually he's factually incorrect.
I'm
so sorry to interrupt you. He's factually incorrect because Dr. Harshad also does not encourage the use of condoms, which is safe sex behavior. So what is he talking? It's not what Dr. Harshad said in A blog or B blog or 2007. It is the mindset of Dr. Harshad. He says do not use condoms. He says do not learn sex. Nobody, not the BJP spokesperson. So just a second please. Nor the BJP spokesperson nor Praveen has been able to tell us specifically what do they mean by vulgarity in sex education. What is so vulgar? Nobody is teaching anything practically. So what is the vulgar part that they can describe that to us?
Question.
See, my point is like this. If 30% of state in a nation is opposing and a person being a doctor and the health minister is opposing, why can't we go for a review? That's my first point. And second point is take the case of United States or United Kingdom. Sex education is going on in United States and United Kingdom.
But I am only asking you, as somebody who has studied this subject and is appearing on national television, I am asking you which part of sex education as is taught today do you disagree with?
No, see, the part or mode of sex education, for an example, in a school, in a well-off school, well-settled school, it can be having facilities and well-trained staff for teaching sex education or to provide sex education for the children there. But not necessary that all schools can provide it. So to provide the schools with enough facilities is also, or the trained staff is also an important point, being a very fragile and sensitive matter. One point. Second is, along with sex education, we have to include the topics of value systems. Value systems of our culture-based value system should be connected along with sex education.
Praveen, here's the point.
From a single point, we can understand
all of that is included when one talks about self-education or sex education. It's not just about sexuality. It's not just about preventive and curative education for STD, HIV or AIDS. It is family life education. It is adolescent reproductive health. It is fostering human dignity, right? It is reproductive rights. It's women's empowerment. It is inter-spouse communication. It is fighting gender bias. It is looking into beliefs and traditions which are part of what we are in India. It's all of it.
And the Justice Verma Commission...
It's not just about sex per se.
And the Justice Verma Commission...
And this is what is being taught now.
And the Justice Verma Commission recommended sex education in all the schools so that this helps in the number of rape cases coming down, so that you have gender sensitization.
Okay, Tehsil, well.
My opinion is we don't want to stand against sex education.
But yet you oppose it.
You're opposing it, yes.
But if someone is having an apprehension, if someone like a Minister of India is having an apprehension,
we've got to move on from this point.
Current education, why can't we go for a broader discussion and review?
Of course he can. Who's stopping anybody from reviewing anything? I was just asking about the content of the subject. If you objected to anything,
see, the minister is not talking anything against sex education.
Praveen, I need to go across to my other panelists.
And the government is not about
Dr. Sujata Rao and Kiran Walia are waiting patiently. Let me go across to Dr. K. Sujata Rao, former head of the National AIDS Control Organization. Ma'am, let me try and get this question across to you. Another comment made by Dr. Harshvardhan is the thrust of the AIDS campaign should not be on the use of condoms. This sends the wrong message that you can have any kind of illicit sexual relationship, but as long as you're using a condom, it's fine. Ma'am, the National AIDS Control Organization has based its success on condom use. Isn't this a regressive statement made by the health minister of the country?
You know, all I say is that if Dr. Harshvardhan says that fidelity should be the main basis, nobody can have any problems. I mean, if all men could abstain from sex in India, we won't have HIV/AIDS at all. But is that reality? That's the issue. And therefore, in a disease which is transmitted from human to human through sexual intercourse, and there is no vaccine, what is the only vaccine available to us to protect yourselves from a life-threatening disease like HIV or hepatitis B is the condom. So the point really is aspirational, idealistic notions of society and social behavior, and morality is one aspect which of course is commendable. No one can find fault with that. But reality is something completely different. As someone was quoting, premarital, extramarital sex is increasing. Society is far more permissive today than it was when I was growing up. And when that is the reality, and you have a whole lot of, you know, IT and TV and media, which is mentioning sex and sexual behavior in very explicit ways, you just have to have the condom as your only lifesaver. In NACO, we look at condom as a vaccine to a polio or any medicines that you take for any disease. So I don't think it's a minister's case that, you know, no to condom. Okay. I just think you have to contextualize what he was saying. But one more point, so this whole business of ABC, which is abstinence, be faithful, and then condom in extreme case, was a Republican theory of US.
Yes.
And Uganda did implement it very faithfully, but they haven't been able to bring down HIV/AIDS. It's still about 7% because it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And in India, we have to be very proud of our successes that we brought down incidence by 50%. Nowhere has this been achieved in the world all over. So I think we should not let our gains be lost because, you know, we have with great difficulty got condom normalized in normal dialogue, and that gain should be protected.
Okay, Dr. Kiran Walia, let me turn this this argument around, because in as much as there has been criticism of Dr. Harshvardhan for some of these remarks as far as the use of condom utilization and the sort is concerned, he is also talking about relationships. He's talking about illicit sexual relationships. He's talking about premarital sexual relationships. He's talking about extramarital relationships. And he's also viewing this from a societal standpoint. We know about the nature of relationships changing in urban India most certainly. So therefore, if you have a health minister who says, let's, for example, keep the family intact, let's keep that core value alive, let's think about sex and sexuality in that context, is there anything wrong with what he's saying?
I think Dr. Harshvardhan is so divorced from reality. I couldn't agree more with Lata Vaidyanathan and Sujata Rao. That way, I would definitely, as I've been holding the education portfolio, that sex education, or we call it gender sensitization, you need not call it sex education, but it's so essential. And in the wake of all that's happening, whether in schools, where in fact, you know, the age at which you think that you should start telling them something about it in most subtle ways, as you rightly said, age appropriate kind of classifications that we have done. We ourselves have introduced it in government schools in Delhi, and our whole curriculum was so much appreciated that the central schools are wanting. CBSE has done. The National Curriculum Federation has been highlighting the need for this in 1982, 85, 2005. I don't know where we are going back to, and do we want, what would be the reverse? The reverse, if it is true, would be to expose these young girls to everything possible that you read in the newspapers, that you watch on television, the girl-child rape, even a small, I mean, it's small boys being harassed. So what would be the reverse? If the reverse has to be checked, then it's most necessary, because in the wake of Nirbhaya case, we thought of a multi-pronged approach, and much before that also. So Delhi government has already, the education department has a system in place, and we've already started it. Now people like Dr. Harshvardhan, I mean, this is retrograde, and I strongly feel that when you talk of women empowerment, I would say girl empowerment. This country shamelessly is one of the highest rates in girl-child trafficking. When we have all those terrible things happening, instead of finding ways how to check behavioral modes, if parents are not able to teach, if there is something with discussion is taboo in the family, then at least the schools must step in. And in the milieu in which we survive, it's very important for schools to play that role when families cannot able to do, society is not able to. So therefore, I strongly feel that gender sensitization, life skills, Yuva programs, all this, the thrust has to be there. And please trust our stakeholders. Trust our private school principals, the government school principals, the psychologists, all those who spend their lifetime in the field of education.
I take the point you're taking.
That they will evolve something sensible. Yes.
Let me go back to.
And as far as the AIDS thing is concerned, let me say that it is very strange what Dr. Harshvardhan is talking about. I don't know, like, Has he not witnessed the world in the last few decades? Has he been so insulated? I do not